I thought I only needed a steady paycheck until it was gone. Have you ever lived without thinking about tomorrow? I have, for 20 years. My name is Lisa Carter. I'm 45 years old and live in Charlotte, North Carolina. For 2 decades, I lived paycheck to paycheck, literally. My salary would come in, and it would go right back out, paying bills, online shopping, ordering takeout, weekend spa days, or shopping with friends. I didn't think I was being reckless. I thought I was just living like everyone else. I wasn't poor, but I wasn't rich either. I was an office manager at an insurance company, making $68,000 a year. No one would have guessed I was living on the edge until the company restructured, and I ended up on the layoff list. I remember that Friday afternoon vividly. My boss called me into her office. The conversation was brief. No drama, no tears. I stood up, grabbed my purse, and went home. One thought kept echoing in my mind. I don't have a single dollar in savings. My credit cards were always near their limit. I had never contributed to a 401k, never built an emergency fund. Money came in, money went out. I used to tell myself, once I earn more, I'll start saving. But that day never came. The next 3 months were hell. I had to borrow money from my younger sister just to cover rent. I cut the cable, sold off some designer handbags, and cried when I couldn't afford a $5 latte. That's when I realized I didn't fail because I lost my job. I failed because I never learned how to manage my money. When you're 45, unemployed, with no financial safety net, and no one to fall back on, that's not just fear. That's a wake-up call. And me, the woman who used to think budgeting is for stingy people, had to start over from scratch. Before I lost my job, anyone looking at my life would have thought I was doing just fine. I rented a 2-bedroom apartment in the South End. Not cheap, but not outrageous either. Every morning I got up at 6:30, brewed coffee with my machine, picked out my office clothes, and drove my 2015 Toyota Camry to work. Everything looked normal. And that was the scary part. I never felt like I was living beyond my means. I didn't splurge on luxury brands regularly. I didn't gamble or play the stock market recklessly. But I also didn't control anything. My money existed to serve the present, and my present was filled with little indulgences. For $1.75 Starbucks coffee every morning. Ordering Uber Eats 3 times a week. Online shopping when I was bored, a $39.99 dress, a $79 skincare set. Subscriptions to 6 different streaming and music apps, and I forgot to cancel most of them. I had an American Express credit card and maxed out the $9,000 limit in just 3 years. I paid the minimum every month, and the interest quietly snowballed into a storm. Every now and then, I tried to save. Once, I opened an online savings account and put in $200, then withdrew it 3 weeks later to buy a plane ticket to Nashville with friends. I always told myself, I'm still young. I work hard. I deserve this. But I was wrong. I lived as if the future was guaranteed, as if nothing could ever go wrong. But life doesn't hand out warranties. I had just never looked closely enough to see that. My mom once said something I completely ignored in my younger years. If you don't make a plan for your money, you're digging your own hole. And I did. I fell into that hole, softly, quietly, until the day I hit the bottom. That October, I lost my job. No warning. No plan. No time to prepare. Just an email inviting me to a 2 p.m. Friday meeting with the plain subject line, meeting, team realignment. The room was silent when I walked in. The department head sat next to HR. No smiles. No eye contact. Within minutes, they told me the company was cutting 12% of staff. I was part of that 12%. I stayed calm as I signed the separation papers. I told myself I'd be fine. But when I walked out of the building into a misty drizzle, I noticed my hands were shaking. I got into my car, turned on the radio, and just started sobbing. Not because I'd lost my job, but because I had nothing to fall back on. When I got home, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account, $238. Checked my credit card, $8,870 out of a $9,000 limit. I still owed $6,200 on my car loan, and rent for next month hadn't been paid. I had never in my life felt so hollow. Me, the woman always smiling at work, buying friends coffee, praised for being stylish and independent, suddenly felt like a lost child who didn't know how to get home. Losing my job didn't just take away my paycheck. It stripped away the illusion I'd been hiding behind for years. I had no financial foundation. I was living under the delusion that everything would always be okay. 3 weeks later, I filed for unemployment, started job hunting, and withdrew money from the retirement fund I once told myself was for later, just to make it through the day. But one morning in November, I looked at my expense breakdown and cried. Not out of sadness, but because, for the first time, I saw the truth. And I saw that I was the one who created this mess. That moment changed everything. No more blame. No more denial. I grabbed an old notebook and wrote on the first page, Lisa's survival plan, starting with $238. I started over with exactly $238 in my bank account and a debt list longer than my Facebook friends list. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't running anymore. I bought a notebook at Dollar Tree, a blue pen, and sat at my kitchen table. No phone, no TV, no music, just me and reality. I wrote down every single number. Rent, $1,150. Credit card debt, $8,870. Car loan, $6,200. Utilities, electricity, water, internet, around $290 per month. All the little things, coffee, skincare, Netflix, Uber Eats, over $400 per month. I was shocked when I saw the real numbers. Not because they were huge, but because I'd never thought to actually write them down. For years, I'd just guesstimated in my head and lived by feel. But now I learned my first real lesson. Money isn't emotional. It's just numbers. And if you don't control it, it will control you. So I started cutting. Netflix, canceled. Spotify Premium, canceled. Coffee shop runs, swapped out for homebrewed drip coffee with a $15 machine. Takeout, limited to once a month, and only if there was a discount code. I called my credit card company and asked to switch to a lower interest payment plan. To my surprise, they agreed, just because I had the nerve to ask and told the truth. I called my landlord and asked for a 5-day grace period on rent. He agreed, too, because I'd never been late before. And I learned my second big lesson. When you're honest and proactive, people are more willing to help than you think. I started picking up freelance gigs, data entry, surveys, remote admin tasks. Nothing glamorous, but every time I earned $50, I'd write it in all caps in my notebook. One step forward. I used envelopes to organize my cash, groceries, utilities, gas. Every dollar I spent, I tracked. Every dollar I saved, I celebrated by not spending it. And me, the woman who used to sip $12 cocktails at a bar without blinking, was now thrilled to buy a bag of rice on clearance. Life wasn't easier, but it was clearer. And that was something I hadn't had in 20 years of working. If you think getting your finances together is just about punching numbers into a calculator and jotting things down, then you've never lived inside my head. The first few weeks of budgeting, I felt lost. No more weekend brunches with friends. No more stress relief trips to Target for random stuff. I wasn't just cutting spending, I was shedding pieces of who I used to be. And it hurt. One Saturday, a friend texted, "Wanna do barbecue? It's been forever since we hung out." I typed, "Okay," then erased it. Typed, "I'm busy." Erased that too. Finally, I just told the truth. "I'm tightening my budget." Rain check. Sending that text felt like admitting defeat. Even though my friend replied with kindness, "Totally get it, always happy to see you, red heart," I still sat there staring at the screen, feeling broke. And alone. I stumbled more than once. One night, I opened the Amazon app just to browse, and 20 minutes later, I'd bought a pair of $64 shoes I didn't need. When they arrived, I felt even worse than I did when I was broke. I returned them the next day and taped a note to my desk. Freedom, instant gratification. The hardest part wasn't spending less, it was facing myself without the distractions I used to buy. I realized I'd been using money like a painkiller. Every time I was stressed, tired, or felt like I wasn't enough, I'd buy something just to feel in control. But money never cured the anxiety. It just hid it for a while. And when the money ran out, I had to learn how to sit with my real emotions. Some nights, I'd cook dinner and cry not because I was sad, but because for the first time, I was actually taking care of myself. No retail therapy. No splurges. Just chopping vegetables, seasoning the food, and knowing that what I was doing had meaning. The first weeks of saving felt like going back to the gym after years on the couch. Every move hurt. But day by day, I got stronger. After about 2 months of counting every penny, I realized I wasn't just saving money, I was saving myself from panic. For the first time in my life, I had a plan. I tried all kinds of budgeting tools from apps to spreadsheets, but eventually, I came back to the simplest one, pen and paper. I started using a zero-based budget where every dollar I made had a job. 30% for essentials, 20% for debt payments, 10% for savings, 10% for investments, 5% for emergencies, and just 25% for life, the category I used to spend 100% on. I taped that budget to my fridge. Every morning when I walked by, I'd touch it like a promise. No more spend now, figure it out later. Every dollar had a name, a reason, and a limit. I started building an emergency fund, just for the unexpected. Car trouble, illness, another job loss. In that first month, I only managed to save $50. But I rewarded myself by sitting on the balcony with a homemade coffee, watching the sunset. Didn't cost a thing, yet I felt richer than ever. I read books on personal finance. The first name I came across was Dave Ramsey, then Susie Orman, and eventually I found a YouTube channel by a woman who went bankrupt at 40 and retired at 60. Every story reminded me, I'm not alone. I also started learning about investing, beginning with ETFs, index funds, and a Roth IRA. I didn't understand everything right away, but I took notes, bit by bit. To me, every dollar invested was a promise to my future. But the most important thing wasn't the money, it was the commitment. I didn't promise myself I'd become rich. I only promised that I would never go back to being the person I used to be, the one who laughed loudly in front of others, but cried silently every time she opened her bank account. I wasn't trying to control money. I was learning how to take control of my life. 6 months after I started over with $238 and a mountain of debt, I woke up one April morning and realized something I hadn't experienced in nearly 2 decades of working. I no longer feared Mondays. I didn't count the days to payday anymore. No more checking my bank account while holding my breath, dreading the red numbers. No more hating weekends just because they brought me one day closer to the electric bill. I looked at my savings account, over $2,800 in my emergency fund. I had paid off more than $4,000 in credit card debt. My monthly expenses were down to 60% of what they used to be. I no longer spent based on emotions. I spent with intention. And I knew this was the first real sense of freedom I'd felt in a long, long time. I still remember the first morning I went grocery shopping without worrying whether my card would be declined. I picked up a carton of eggs, some fresh vegetables, and a bag of coffee I actually liked, then walked to the checkout with my head held high. I wasn't shopping because I deserved it. I was shopping because I was in control of my choices. Another day, my car got a flat tire on the road. Before, that would have been a financial nightmare. But that day, I quietly opened my banking app, transferred $110 from my emergency fund, called a tow truck, and thanked my past self for being prepared. I felt reliable, not to anyone else, to myself. I also started sharing my journey in a small online forum where others in midlife were struggling the same way I had. A woman from Florida messaged me, "I'm 47 and starting over too. Thank you for giving me hope." And I realized my journey wasn't just about numbers. It was about transformation. I used to think freedom meant having lots of money. Now I understand. Freedom means knowing exactly what you have, what you need, and why you're choosing the life you live. There was one morning I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, not to check the roots of my hair I hadn't dyed in weeks, not to rush through blush before work, but just to look. I looked at myself, and I smiled. A small smile, but a genuine one. Because for the first time in years, I didn't see a failure. I felt proud. Not because I was rich. I'm not. Not because I'd done anything extraordinary. I just stopped buying Starbucks, cooked for myself, quit impulse shopping, and made a budget every month. But those small things repeated over 8 months turned me into someone new. I used to spend money to numb my emotions. Now I use my emotions to build my future. I used to scold myself, "You're 45 and don't even have $5,000 in the bank?" Now I tell myself, "You're 45 and starting over. That takes courage." I remember walking past a beauty store once, the same store where I had once dropped over $300 in a single afternoon after a fight with an ex. That day, I stopped. I looked at the glittering items behind the glass. And I didn't walk in. Not because I couldn't afford to, but because I no longer needed to buy something to feel like I mattered. Instead, I walked home, made a cup of tea, opened my spending tracker, updated my monthly investments, then rewarded myself with a night of reading under the warm yellow light of my lamp, a light I used to overlook in the chaos of constant spending. And it was those quiet, simple moments that made me feel more powerful than any designer handbag ever could. I no longer have anything to prove to anyone. I just need to keep living in a way that lets me sleep peacefully at night and wake up with a smile. If you had asked me at 43, "Have you thought about retirement?" I would have laughed. Retirement was a luxury for the wealthy. I was living paycheck to paycheck, barely affording a washing machine repair, let alone dreaming of sipping tea and reading at 65. But at 46, after a year of change, I started running the numbers and discovered something surprising. Retirement wasn't a fantasy. It was a formula, and I could solve it. I opened a Roth IRA and began investing regularly, just $200 a month. I learned to choose low-cost index funds like VTI and F0X. Every time I put money into it, I no longer felt the sting of sacrifice. I felt confident. I knew that if I kept investing $200 per month for 20 years with a 7% return, I'd have close to $100,000, and that's just one piece of the puzzle. I also increased my 401k contributions at work to 8%, with a 4% employer match. For the first time, I had a financial system that ran without chaos every Monday morning. I still remember the day I used a retirement calculator to estimate when I could retire. And instead of seeing an impossible number, I saw a path. Not easy, not fast, but possible. I've started allowing myself to dream of a small house by a lake, maybe in Idaho or Vermont, where homes are still reasonably priced. A vegetable garden, a wooden chair on the porch, and a life no longer revolving around a monthly paycheck. I know I still have a long way to go, but for the first time in my life, I'm not running from the future. I'm walking toward it. 2 years after my financial rebirth, I moved into a smaller apartment in the suburbs of Denver. It wasn't fancy, but it was warm, clean, and just right for a single woman learning to live slower and more honestly. I still remember signing the lease. I paid 3 months rent up front. It felt strange. Not because I liked spending money, but because I finally felt in control of my life. My spending was steady. My debts were almost gone. My emergency fund could cover 6 months of living expenses. I developed the habit of checking my budget every week, like checking in on my health. I no longer flinched when opening my banking app. And most importantly, I no longer feared the unexpected. One afternoon, my boss called me into his office. "We're planning layoffs," he said. "You may be affected." I looked at him and smiled gently. "Thanks for the heads up. I've been preparing for this for 2 years." He blinked, clearly surprised. That's when I realized I was no longer the woman who panicked when she lost her job at 45. I'd become someone else, steady, calm, and reliable. I started blogging about my financial journey, not for fame, but to honor the path I've taken. One day, I got an email from a man in Minnesota. "I'm 52, jobless after a divorce. Your story inspired me to start over." I sat still, staring at the screen. A quiet wave of emotion rose inside me, one I couldn't name. I used to think I was just surviving. Now I know. I'm living with purpose. That evening, I treated myself to a simple dinner, grilled salmon and vegetables. Not because I deserved it in the old way, but because I've learned something important. Anyone can become someone they trust if they begin with small steps. I used to believe money was the main reason relationships in my life fell apart. Fights with partners, tensions with family. I always told myself it was because I didn't have enough to hold it all together. But as I changed the way I looked at money, I realized something deeper. Every relationship starts with how you treat yourself. As I slowly learned to manage my finances, I also began to examine how I loved and cared for myself. I stopped feeling ashamed for not being able to afford lavish parties or expensive gifts for friends. I came to understand that my value wasn't based on how much I could invest in a relationship. Instead, I started building connections based on mutual respect and alignment. I didn't need to prove anything through spending. I just needed to be myself. With my family, I started hosting simple gatherings, home-cooked meals instead of eating out. These dinners not only saved money, but gave us a chance to reconnect. We talked more, understood each other better, and instead of worrying about the bill, we laughed and shared stories. With friends, I no longer felt pressure to keep up with their luxury vacations or trendy shopping habits. I invited them for park walks or to join local community events, spaces where joy didn't cost anything. Evenings spent sipping tea, talking about life, dreams, and past failures. Those made me feel truly seen and loved. And in romantic relationships, I stopped clinging to people who only offered temporary comfort. I learned to love myself first. When I loved myself, I no longer allowed anyone to treat me poorly. I didn't need someone else to protect me. I had become my own protector. I stopped believing that love meant sacrificing everything for someone else. To me now, love is about sharing, and sometimes it's a quiet form of respect. I realized that unless I could love myself fully, I could never love someone else completely. Looking back at my journey, I can't help but feel proud. Never before have I felt such a strong sense of control over my life. I didn't just pay off debt, I built a solid financial foundation. I didn't just save money, I invested in myself, in opportunities that could lead to financial independence. And now, I'm starting to imagine a future where I retire when I want to, not when I'm forced to. Financial independence has given me a kind of freedom I never thought possible. I can choose the work I enjoy without stressing about the paycheck. I can spend time with family, pursue personal interests without the fear of falling short. I can decide where to live, whether it's a quiet seaside town or in the middle of a vibrant city. My financial plan now goes far beyond just not overspending or cutting costs. I'm investing in retirement funds, real estate, and even courses to grow my skills. I no longer fear whether I'll have enough money to survive. Now, I'm planning how to build long-term wealth. I've started exploring new investment opportunities, from growth-oriented stock funds to rental properties. One day, I don't just want a decent retirement fund. I want a stream of passive income that allows me to live without working too much. And the surprising thing is, as I gained control over my finances, I realized I'd also taken control of my life. I can now make big decisions without feeling financially trapped. I can say yes to projects and dreams I once didn't dare to imagine. And I no longer feel like I'm living under someone else's rules or limitations. Every month, when I look at my accounts and see my savings and investments grow, I know I'm on the right path. And those numbers, they're not just numbers. Money, it's a symbol of freedom and control that I've built with my own hands. When I look back on my old life, I realize I was merely surviving. Each day, I buried myself in work, in financial worries, in debt payments and spending, only to repeat that same cycle over and over again with no end in sight. Life felt like an exhausting hamster wheel with no room for dreams. But after I changed the way I managed my money, I began to rediscover dreams that had been buried for years. At first, they seemed distant and out of reach. I used to dream of writing books, of traveling alone, of quiet mornings by the lake, and I used to think those were just unrealistic fantasies. But now, I understand something clearly. I no longer have to choose between reality and dreams. When I learned how to take control of my finances, I wasn't just planning for the future, I was opening up new possibilities for the life I'm living right now. One of the first dreams I made come true was traveling. I had always longed to visit cities I'd only seen on TV or read about in books: Paris, Rome, Kyoto. But before, travel felt like an impossible luxury. Now, I make it a goal to set aside a small amount of money each month just for that. The surprising thing was, once I started saving for these trips, I didn't just think about the destinations. I thought about how I wanted to experience the world. I didn't have to go on the kinds of trips that other people took. I wanted to travel alone on my own terms, slowly, intentionally, without racing against time. My first trip was to Kyoto, where I wandered down quiet streets, watched the cherry blossoms bloom, and visited peaceful temples. I didn't have to rush. I just lived in the moment. And it became one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. I also began taking writing classes, something I had dreamed of for a long time. In the past, I lacked the confidence to share my story. But now I know that financial stability gave me the foundation to go after what I truly wanted. I started writing short articles and small essays about my financial journey, and over time, I realized something. Writing is how I connect with the world. The dream of writing a book, something I had put away for years, no longer feels so far away. I'm not just living anymore. I'm dreaming again. And those dreams are slowly becoming real. Before I changed how I handled money, I was terrified of failure. Every time I lost money, every misstep in spending or investing felt like an irreversible defeat. But when I started learning how to master my finances, I also began learning how to face failure differently. Failure is no longer the worst thing that can happen. To me now, failure isn't the end. It's part of the learning process. I've come to realize that without failures, I'd never grow. One of the biggest lessons I learned was when I invested in a stock fund that I thought I had researched thoroughly. But the market shifted unexpectedly and I lost a large sum of money. In the past, I might have panicked and spiraled. But now I saw it differently. Instead of seeing myself as a failure, I sat down and analyzed everything. I realized I hadn't done everything right, and I needed to learn from that mistake. I started studying long-term investment strategies, how to analyze markets, and how to manage risk across different investments. And instead of staying stuck in disappointment, I chose to learn from every mistake and adjust my strategy moving forward. I've also made mistakes with spending. Once, I splurged on a designer handbag I didn't really need. Before, I might have justified it as treating myself after a tough stretch. But now, I saw it for what it was: an unwise financial decision. It became a lesson in patience and self-restraint. Instead of feeling guilty, I chose to donate the bag to a charity. That choice didn't just make me feel better about myself. It sparked a new realization. True happiness doesn't come from material things, but from simple, kind acts. I also learned that personal failures aren't the end, either. When my marriage ended, I once believed it was an unforgivable mistake, something I'd never recover from. But now I know that the end of a relationship isn't a sign of failure, but a chance to rebuild and find a new path. These failures, instead of frightening me, have become invaluable lessons. They've taught me patience. They've taught me to accept imperfection. And more importantly, they've taught me how to keep living with strength and hope. Now, whenever I encounter failure, whether in work, finances, or my personal life, I see it as a part of growing. I'm no longer afraid of it because I know that only by learning from my failures can I move forward. When I look back on my journey, I realize something. Everything I've achieved today didn't come from luck or chance. It came from perseverance and belief in myself. I used to live in a constant rush, without a plan, without savings. I used to spend money without thinking and lived each month just trying to stay ahead of the bills. But now, after so much change, I know that financial freedom doesn't come from having more money. It comes from being able to manage what you already have. My journey hasn't always been smooth. There were months when I felt like I was moving too fast and couldn't keep up. There were times I wanted to give up, especially when my investments didn't perform as I'd hoped. But I learned that persistence is key. Every small decision I made, every dollar I saved, every investment I took, it all became part of the bigger picture of life. And I learned something else that's just as important. Never compare your journey to someone else's. I used to feel like I was falling behind when I looked at people who seemed more successful. But now I know that everyone has their own path. No one else can measure my worth using their standards. I just need to focus on my own journey, trust the decisions I make, and keep moving forward. With every step I take, I feel a kind of freedom I never had before. I no longer worry whether I'll have enough to cover my bills at the end of the month. I no longer fear unexpected changes because I've built something stronger. Trust in myself. What truly matters is the future. I now have a solid emergency fund, a long-term investment plan, and clear financial strategies. But more importantly, I've found a sense of inner freedom. I no longer feel pressured by money, and I'm no longer afraid that failure will defeat me. I've learned how to accept myself and understand that everyone stumbles sometimes, but it's those very stumbles that help us stand taller and stronger. These days, I'm not just focused on saving money or hitting financial goals. I'm thinking about building a meaningful life, one where I can live on my own terms, do what I love, and no longer worry constantly about finances. Freedom doesn't come from having a full bank account. It comes from being able to live the life I choose. And to gain that kind of freedom, I've learned that nothing can replace persistence and belief in yourself. Because when you truly believe in yourself, you can overcome any challenge, face failure head-on, and keep moving forward until you achieve exactly what you've been dreaming of.